We have a problem, Batman. Gotham needs you again.
Darkseid is not a villain. He is a force of nature wearing a tyrant's face, the living embodiment of control and domination given form and purpose. His Omega beams don't just kill, they erase existence itself, removing targets from reality as if they never were. The anti-life equation he seeks isn't just power, it's the mathematical proof that free will is an illusion, that all life exists only to serve his vision of order. Fighting Darkseid isn't about stopping a criminal or defeating an enemy. It's about preventing the death of choice itself, the end of every possibility except the one he permits. His strength comes not from his body, but from his certainty that all resistance is temporary, that every rebellion simply delays the inevitable. The contingency protocol must account for an opponent who doesn't fear death because he has already transcended it, who doesn't need to win battles because he has already won the war in his mind. Physical confrontation with Darkseid is not about victory. It's about buying time and creating opportunities for others to act while you're being destroyed. His body is virtually indestructible. His strength rivals Superman's, and his Omega beams can track targets across dimensions and through time itself. The only documented weaknesses involve radion poisoning, which requires proximity to deploy and causes more pain than actual damage. His eyes are his primary weapon, but they're also his point of focus. Force him to track multiple targets simultaneously, and his accuracy decreases marginally. Use smoke, mirrors, holograms, anything that creates visual confusion and forces him to rely on other senses. His size makes him slower than smaller opponents in confined spaces, but he compensates with area effect attacks that make dodging irrelevant. The strategy isn't about hurting him, it's about surviving long enough to implement other aspects of the plan. Every second of direct combat is borrowed time that must be used to save lives or advance larger strategic objectives. The psychological approach requires understanding that Darkseid's greatest weapon is his absolute certainty in his own supremacy. He doesn't doubt, doesn't question, doesn't consider alternatives to his vision of perfect order. This unwavering conviction makes him nearly impossible to manipulate, but creates a specific type of blindness. He cannot conceive of defeat because he has never truly experienced it, which means he doesn't plan for scenarios where his power proves insufficient. The strategy involves presenting him with problems that raw power cannot solve, situations where his usual methods create complications, rather than solutions. Force him to rule populations that resist through passive means. Create scenarios where his control generates the chaos he seeks to eliminate. Demonstrate that his perfect order is actually perfect stagnation. The goal isn't to change his mind, it's to create circumstances where his philosophy becomes self-defeating, where his own actions undermine his objectives. When order becomes chaos, when control becomes confusion, when certainty meets genuine unpredictability, these are the moments when even gods can be surprised. The technological warfare focuses on the fact that Darkseid's power, while vast, operates according to consistent rules and limitations that can be studied and countered. His Omega beams travel in straight lines that can be predicted and deflected with sufficient materials and positioning. His mother box technology, while advanced, follows logical patterns that can be disrupted through specific interference frequencies. Apokolips itself runs on technology that, despite its sophistication, must follow universal physical laws. The strategy involves developing countermeasures based on careful observation of his methods, creating technology specifically designed to interfere with his most powerful abilities, and most importantly, finding ways to turn his own technological advantages against him. This includes hijacking his boom tube network to strand him between dimensions, corrupting his communication systems to isolate him from his forces, and developing weapons that can at least temporarily disrupt his most dangerous capabilities. The goal isn't to match his power, it's to make his power work against him, to transform his strengths into liabilities through careful planning and superior strategy. Resource denial represents the most practical approach to long-term containment, because even gods require resources to maintain their empires. Darkseid's power depends on the infrastructure of Apokolips, the loyalty of his servants, the fear of his enemies, and the constant flow of tribute from conquered worlds. Remove these supporting elements, and his personal power, while still immense, becomes isolated and eventually containable. The strategy involves identifying and disrupting his supply lines, supporting rebellion movements on conquered worlds, eliminating his key lieutenants through targeted operations, and most importantly, demonstrating to his subjects that he is not invincible. This requires coordinated action across multiple worlds and dimensions, alliances with other cosmic-level entities who oppose his expansion, and careful timing to ensure that disruption efforts reinforce each other rather than being defeated piecemeal. The goal is to transform him from an emperor commanding vast resources into a powerful but isolated individual who must rely solely on his personal abilities. Alliance building becomes critical when facing a threat that exceeds any single individual's capacity to handle. Darkseid's power requires a response that involves every available resource, every ally who can contribute to the effort, every individual willing to stand against tyranny regardless of the personal cost. This means setting aside personal differences with other heroes, coordinating with cosmic entities who rarely involve themselves in earthly affairs, and even considering temporary truces with enemies who recognize Darkseid as a greater threat than current conflicts. The strategy requires careful diplomacy to maintain these alliances under extreme pressure, clear communication to coordinate efforts across vast distances and different fighting styles, and most importantly, accepting that victory might require personal sacrifice from everyone involved. The alliance must be built on shared understanding that failure means the end of free will for all sentient life, that individual survival becomes meaningless if the universe itself falls under Darkseid's control. This level of cooperation requires leadership that can inspire beings who have never worked together to trust each other with everything they value. What do you think, Alfred?
Master Bruce, you're planning for war against something that transcends traditional concepts of good and evil. Darkseid represents the universe's potential for absolute order taken to its logical extreme, complete control, perfect submission, the death of choice itself. While your strategic thinking is sound, I fear you're approaching this as if it were simply another, albeit larger, criminal to be stopped. The question isn't whether he can be defeated. It's whether defeating him is worth becoming the very thing you're fighting against. To match his ruthlessness, you'd have to abandon the principles that make victory meaningful. Perhaps the real battle isn't against Darkseid himself, but against the temptation to embrace his methods in the name of stopping him. Sometimes the most important victory is remaining human while fighting monsters. Alfred's warning cuts to the heart of the philosophical challenge Darkseid represents. The greatest danger isn't that he might win, it's that stopping him might require becoming him. The contingency protocols must include safeguards against this corruption, checks and balances that prevent the Alliance from adopting his methods, even when those methods would be more effective. This means accepting that some strategies are off-limits, even if they would guarantee victory. Maintaining moral boundaries even when pragmatism suggests abandoning them. Choosing harder paths that preserve the values we're fighting to protect. The plan must account for the fact that Darkseid's greatest victory would be forcing his opponents to prove his philosophy correct. That order requires control, that peace demands submission, that choice is an illusion best abandoned. The resistance must demonstrate that free will can triumph without sacrificing itself, that cooperation can overcome domination without becoming domination, that hope remains possible even in the face of absolute despair. This requires constant vigilance against our own darker impulses, continuous commitment to principles that might cost us tactical advantages. Communication disruption targets his greatest strategic weakness, his belief that he alone possesses the vision and intelligence necessary to rule the universe. Darkseid's empire depends on his personal oversight and decision-making, his inability to trust subordinates with significant independence or authority. This creates bottlenecks in his command structure that can be exploited through targeted interference, jam his communications with conquered worlds, disrupt his ability to coordinate responses to multiple simultaneous threats, force him to make decisions without complete information. These tactics exploit his need for total control by making that control impossible to maintain. The strategy includes developing technology capable of interfering with his communication methods, identifying key nodes in his information network that can be sabotaged or corrupted, and most importantly, creating so many simultaneous problems that even his vast intelligence cannot process and respond to all of them effectively. When a tyrant who demands perfect control loses the ability to know what's happening in his empire, his strength becomes weakness, his certainty becomes confusion, his order becomes chaos. The final protocol acknowledges that contingency planning against Darkseid is ultimately about preparing for the unthinkable, not just his victory, but the possibility that stopping him might require sacrifices that fundamentally change what it means to be human. The strategies outlined serve as blueprints for resistance, frameworks for hope, proof that even absolute power has limitations that can be exploited by those willing to pay the necessary price. But they also serve as reminders that some prices are too high to pay, that some victories are actually defeats, that preserving what we're fighting for matters more than simply winning the fight. The protocols exist not because they guarantee success, but because they provide structure for resistance when everything else has failed, guidance for action when despair counsels surrender, hope when hope seems impossible. Because in the end, the real victory against Darkseid isn't proving that he can be defeated. It's proving that free will, choice, and human dignity are worth defending even when the odds are impossible. When darkness claims it is inevitable, light must prove that inevitability is just another word for lack of imagination, another excuse for surrendering before the fight begins, another lie that tyrants tell to make resistance seem futile. The contingency exists not to guarantee victory, but to guarantee that defeat, if it comes, will be earned rather than given.